All right, so in this video, it's just going to be an unedited walkthrough slash rant for why I like trackpad aiming on the Steam Deck and the things I had to change from the defaults in order to get it to work well for me. And maybe this will give you some ideas because, yeah, I don't think the defaults are good, and I think that's why a lot of people have trouble with it. And I'm going to try to do that while playing here, so bear with me. I'm not used to it. So the first thing you want to do is to lower the vertical scale. And what that'll do is make it work like Flick Stick or Splatoon. If you've heard of those, um, basically what they do is you use gyro with them, and that's what we're using here. We're not using aim assist. And so you use gyro to aim in all directions, and in Flick Stick and Splatoon, you use the stick to mostly or only like left and right, like turn horizontally. Actually, I have a Flick Stick set up right here on the stick right now, and I'll show that right now. Yeah, you can only use it to turn left or right, and you use the gyro to look everywhere. Same with default stick, like this. I have it bound to shortcut to show you. I'll play with stick for a bit, just so you can compare while I'm talking here. But yeah, the idea behind those is stick is just for horizontal turning, and gyro is for aiming in all directions. And you want the trackpad to be the same thing, because you don't want the trackpad to fight with the gyro, which it kind of does by default. You want it to work together with the gyro. So the key thing is to lower the vertical scale. When I started, I cut it to like 20, something really low, 20, 25. You could even try 0 if you're really having trouble. But cut that vertical scale down. And yeah, that alone should help a lot. And then actually, as you get better with it, as you practice, you're going to be able to bring that vertical scale back up. Now I set it to maybe 40 or even 50, which is still half the horizontal. And whoops, I'm getting cornered here. It's still half the horizontal, and the default is 100, which is it's too out of control for most people. But actually, as you get better, you'll even be able to get it back up to, like, if you wanted to play without gyro, you could set it back up to 100 or something high. I think 60 is plenty high because that matches sort of the aspect ratio. So you can see here with stick, I'm using the gyro a lot more than I do have with the trackpad. And turning isn't as instant. With the trackpad, you get instant, pretty precise turns. And I can actually do most of the aiming with the trackpad. And that's the purpose for raising the vertical scale back up. So you could still do vertical aiming with the trackpad without gyro. Oh, the guy's dead. And so with trackpad plus gyro, the advantage is, I'm going back to trackpad right now. You actually do most of the aiming. I would say 90% of the aiming with the trackpad. And 10% is with the gyro. So when I play trackpad plus gyro, I hardly use the gyro. Whereas when I'm playing with stick, especially flick stick like this, I can't switch back. But with regular stick, since it's not as precise to turn, I find I have to use the gyro a lot more, even for simple things like, you know, when you have to look down at boxes to loot them. I have to use gyro more with the stick, or I feel like I do. I'm sure with practice you could get better with it, but that's the thing. Like, trackpad didn't take that much practice. Trackpad was actually faster for me to learn than stick plus gyro, dual stick plus gyro. And maybe that's my background as a keyboard and mouse player. But yeah, I picked up trackpad pretty quick once I got the settings down. So as I mentioned, vertical scale is most important there. And the next thing I think you should change is, or I recommend changing, is the smoothing. So when you're turning with the trackpad, you don't care about like each individual point. You know, like if you're controlling a cursor, like if I bring up the menu here, you see there's a cursor. When you're controlling a cursor in a 2D space like this, you know, you're trying to pinpoint it on a specific point, right? But that's different from turning with the trackpad like this. Because when you're turning, you're not trying to get to a single point, really. What you're doing is drawing a line, right, with your thumb. And that's what you turn along, right? You turn along that line. So you actually don't care about like the individual point. You want those points to be averaged out into a single smooth line. And that's why I max out the smoothing. I don't think it introduces any latency. I haven't noticed that myself. I think the algorithm they use is pretty good about not doing that. What it does do though is you'll find sometimes if you don't have that smoothing, at least what I found is that like you'll have these random moments where like your trackpad just flings off by itself. And I think that's another thing that throws people off from trackpad aiming, is that by default, with the default smoothing and the default friction, which I'll get to next, it's more prone to just fling off in a different direction like this when you don't intend it to. So maxing out the smoothing, I think, really helps take care of that. And then the other thing that helps with that is to increase the trackball friction. So I set trackball friction to high. Or turn off the friction, which is, you know, it's kind of confusing because that's actually like infinite friction if you think about it. You know, if you go low, medium, high, infinite friction will just make it stop immediately. But in the UI, it's called off. So by setting that friction high, because I don't rely on that trackpad friction sliding too much. You know, I'm doing it right here deliberately, like spinning myself, but with a fling. I never really do it deliberately. I do still like to have some of that sliding, because I did like try turning it off completely and it felt a bit jarring to me. So I set it to high, so I still have some of that sliding. But you know, it's up to you. You may be okay with it. You may want it off completely. Just play with the values. But generally, the higher you set the friction, the higher you want to set your sensitivity to compensate for it. And so I usually jack up the sensitivity. In this case, it's like over 300%. High enough so that with one full swipe here, or a comfortable swipe across most of the trackpad, lets me do at least the 180. Because that's what you need, right? You don't need a full 360. And with the trackpad, you get decent, like you generally know what direction you're gonna turn, right? So if you're gonna turn right, you're gonna have your thumb on the left side of the trackpad, so you have that range to turn right. Same with the left. And you could say that is one disadvantage of the trackpad compared to the stick, where, you know, with the stick you don't really hit that edge, right, by nature. Yeah, I could turn in a circle like this forever. With the trackpad, you can hit that edge sometimes, but I find it's not really an issue. Like subconsciously, I guess I'm able to handle it. Like even if you do hit the edge like this, you can quickly readjust to go back. You don't need edge spin. You don't need to rely on the trackball sliding. It's an easy readjustment. Let me just kill this. So yeah, in summary, to get trackball turning to feel smooth and controlled, cut down the vertical scale. Increase smoothing and increase trackball friction. Those are friendlies. Now let's get to some action here. And those are the key settings for trackpad. And for gyro, I set it to as mouse. Usually the default sensitivity of 100 is perfectly fine for me. As long as I can look at the sky comfortably like this and aim at things right above me, I'm good. And I set the gyro smoothing to 0. So the default smoothing for both trackpad and dude, oh, I'm supposed to go back to the house. The default smoothing for both trackpad and gyro smoothing is 20 in the middle. I max out the trackball smoothing and I minimize the gyro smoothing so they sort of balance each other out. So that lets the gyro be really precise. But it will be shakier, so if you are sensitive to that, just choose it to what you desire. So my last tip here is, for some reason, I think the most controversial out of the ones I've shared, and that's to switch your trigger finger from your right hand to your left hand. And the reasoning is like aiming with the trackpad and shooting is not like shooting a gun. It's more like shooting a guitar and or playing a guitar. And what I mean by that is whoops, cutscene. What I mean by that is when you have a guitar, one hand plays the frets and or not plays, but it controls the notes you play by what frets you press, right? But when you play those notes is controlled by your right picking hand or strumming hand. And there's a reason like people don't play one-handed guitars. You're gonna be far more proficient by splitting what you're trying to play and when you play it, right? And you know, by splitting it, you can do slides along the strings of the guitar. You know, all these cool effects that you, unless you're Ichika Nito, you wouldn't be able to pull off with one hand. Same thing with shooting on the deck. There's certain things you can't do when you have your trigger finger on the same hand as the trackpad. Especially if you're trying to do a drag and drop. It sort of anchors, it sort of prevents your thumb from comfortably reaching the full range of the trackpad. When you move your trigger finger off to the opposite hand, your thumb is free. It's unconstrained. It's not affected, but it doesn't get jittered by firing like this. Like that's what I noticed, and I know other people have noticed. Like when you're firing on the same hand and trying to aim here, it sort of throws itself off, right? It throws your aim off. That's much less of an issue if you just move it to the opposite hand. Aim with this one. You could use the full range of the pad. Your thumb can be in a more relaxed grip and just comfortably move across this whole range. Not that you really need it, and like people like that come from the Steam controller complain about the size of the thumb pad, and it hasn't been an issue for me. I think it's like actually a higher resolution or whatever the term is, um, compared to the Steam controller trackpad. I do have that, and so it sort of compensates for like the smaller size and just the way I set it up with the reduced vertical scale. I still feel pretty in control. It still feels nice to me. So yeah, that's my last major tip. Fire with the opposite hand. You might like it better. And finally, I'm gonna compare it to flick stick because I know that's what gets lots of coverage. 3 Clicks Philip did a video on that on the Steam Deck CS:GO, saying, "Oh, he thinks flick stick is the future," and I actually disagree with that, and I'll explain why. I'm using flick stick now, by the way. So flick stick originated by Jib Smart, and I believe he originally designed it on the DualSense controller for the PlayStation. And I think it's great in that context as like a sort of workaround to get faster stick aiming on PlayStation, or basically with any conventional controller without thumb pads, right? I don't think it's I don't think it's the end all be all. I think thumb pads are still superior, like you have on the Steam Deck or Steam controller. And like if you think about it with flick stick, like I realize you can't see the cursor here, but like if you go to any menu with the cursor and use flick stick, you only have movement along one dimension with the stick, right? Mapped to this awkward 360 on the stick, which is basically like twin stick. It is twin stick, but instead of seeing your character from top down, you're seeing your character in first person, but it's as if some guy was controlling you from the top down. And that's another thing. I'll get into how you can do twin stick better with the trackpad in another video. But basically, you only have one. You have to use gyro with flick stick to look up and down at all, right? And that's fine with a regular controller. But with something as bulky as a deck, it's just not comfortable. For me at least. And in comparison with the trackpad, you don't have to use gyro so much. You can look up and down normally. Like I said earlier, you actually do most of the aiming with the trackpad. Like it's more like 90-10 trackpad and gyro in my experience. Whereas like flick stick, it's you're relying much more on the gyro. You have to use it to look up and down and get these boxes and stuff. And then you have to recenter. You might have a dedicated recenter button or something like that. But I don't like having a lot of extra buttons that are dedicated to just fixing problems with my config, as opposed to doing stuff like firing weapons and choosing them. Like I want most of my configuration not to like just change modes, or I don't want lots of meta configuration. I like most of my configuration to do actual things in the game, but that's me. So all that to say that I think flick stick is overrated, honestly. Well, especially for using it on the Steam Deck. But in the end, you use what you like best. Everyone's different. And I'm just sharing what worked for me. You might have gotten some ideas, some things to try that you didn't think of on your own. Unfortunately, Valve does not make it easy to sort of discover all these settings and features that you could change. And it's a pain to sometimes get it exactly how you want. And I hope they work on improving that. But I hope this helped at least. And there's plenty of other YouTube guides from great YouTubers like Nerdness and Mosquito, who also Zero Aim. Shout outs to those guys who are showing their settings. And yeah, it's cool to see everyone else's settings and what works for them. And I am ranting at this point, so hope this helped you, and see ya.